friends, and welcome back to our channel, or welcome if you're new here. So the number one question we get asked, and I mean literally on a daily basis, is whether or not you should buy now or wait to buy. Now, first and foremost, I will say that we are never tied to your outcome. Whether you should wait or not is purely up to you and your own circumstances. But what we do say is we want to make sure you have all the information before making that decision.
Yeah, like Kim said, whether you should wait or not is really going to depend on a lot of your own personal factors. But one thing that we can say, being in the business for over a decade now, is that it's almost never positive to wait. If you have to wait before you can qualify, then that's of course one thing, but we rarely see anyone come out on top if they do choose to wait to purchase when they actually have the ability to buy, sooner rather than later. In today's video, we're going to talk about what it would look like to buy or sell this year versus waiting until next year. We're going to give you the rundown on the real estate market. So if you want more information before making that decision, then go ahead and stay tuned and we'll get right into that.
If this is your first time to this channel and you want to know everything about living, eating, sleeping, working, and playing here in Northern Utah, then subscribe below and tap the bell for notifications so you can be the first to know about the current market here in Northern Utah.
We are Sloan and Kim Peterson with the Peterson Group, and we've been in the real estate business for 10 years, and every day we help people just like you looking to buy, sell, invest, or relocate here in Northern Utah, and we absolutely do love it when you guys reach out to us. Whether you're looking to move in 9 days or 90 days, go ahead and give us a call, shoot us a text, or send us an email. All of our information is in that description box below, so we can help you make that smooth transition to Northern Utah. Let's go ahead and get into it.
Okay, so like I said, we have this conversation pretty much daily, and one of the biggest reasons people are waiting right now is because of the interest rates. So one of the pros to actually waiting to purchase is that right now it is projected that interest rates will drop 4 more times between now and the end of next year. So with waiting, there is the possibility of a lower interest rate, which of course could save you a couple $100s every month. But that being said, Sloan, having been in the business for as long as we've been in the business, typically what do we see when interest rates do drop?
Yeah, that's a great question, and actually a major con to waiting until interest rates do drop is that we do often see a surge in buyer activity, and what happens is that does create a frenzy in our market. We're going to go more into inventory and what that does mean when buyers come into the market all at once. But when interest rates do go down, the stat is actually by every 0.5% in interest rate that it decreases, home prices are going to increase by roughly $10,000. So by waiting for lower interest rates, you might actually have to pay a higher purchase price for that home. So right now, our lender is actually offering what we call a free fi. And what that means is that if you purchase, now in the next year or two, you actually do the refi for free, which would save you some money and allow you to have that peace of mind that when rates do drop, that you can still, have that lowered and then still, get in on the cheap rates right now, or not cheap rates, but cheap lower prices anyway, and then you can get that equity appreciation gain as we move forward.
No, you're absolutely right. And I love that our lender is doing that. So going back to something you touched on, I want to talk a little bit about buyer demand and supply and demand here in Utah specifically. So currently Utah is about 35,000 homes short for what we actually need for our population and everyone to have sufficient housing. Right now, a lot of buyers, it feels like, are at a stalemate or kind of sitting on the fence and waiting and seeing. The pro to purchasing right now, if you can, is that buyers actually have a lot of leverage because there aren't so many buyers in the market. So what I mean by buying power is that you actually have leverage in terms of getting concessions paid, which means your closing costs paid for, being able to do other types of financing that allow you to save more money in pocket, and also asking for sellers to pay for any deferred maintenance in the home, any sort of repairs, credit for them, lowering purchase price, things like that. Despite the housing shortage, because so many buyers are choosing to wait, there's quite a good amount of inventory to choose from for a buyer. So that's another plus to buying right now, is that you can kind of choose what you want to purchase. Okay, so Sloan, what is going to happen though if a buyer does choose to wait?
That's a good question. So again, the pro is going to be obviously the lower interest rates, but buyers are really hoping to also see prices, start to drop. Now, with the supply and demand problem, once buyers do flood that market because of reduced rates, then we could expect to see kind of the same market that we've seen in 2020, which is going to be the inventory coming down, people starting to bid a lot higher, and you're getting multiple offers on every property again. There's obviously going to be a lot lower inventory, so there's going to be less, houses to choose from, and then you're going to have to take it in the condition that it's in, which might be taking on, more deferred maintenance and things like that. Home prices are actually pretty reasonable, more so than they have been in the last few years. Let's give you just an example though. So we own a rental property. We could have sold it for $405,000 the last time we checked last year, and then now there's been a few that I've listed this year that are selling for, $360,000, $365,000. So why buyers still consider the market really unaffordable? Prices actually have stabilized quite a lot, even in the last year. So people want to say, well, that means that we're losing money, right? Well, it's like, obviously, unless you bought last year and had that happen, then maybe you could be in a little bit of an underwater. But most cases, everyone bought, quite a few years ago. So you would actually still think a few $100,000 above what you had before. So, the concern of waiting is, that once those interest rates do come down, buyers are going to flood the market. Our inventory is going to go down because of the supply and demand problem, and it's going to become more of a competitive market again. We're going to see those purchase prices shoot back up, as well as really no concessions, for the buyer. So no closing costs. They might not be willing to pay the buyer agent. There could be a lot of things that can come into that. So it's really a matter of how much money do you have, if any, to be able to compete in a market like we've seen in 2020.
So I want to dive more into buyer demand and supply and demand here in Utah, because of course it's different for every state. Right now we have about 11,000 homes, which is more than we've seen in a long time, probably since about 2018. So of course, a pro to that is again having the inventory to choose from and having a little bit more negotiation power as a buyer. Our median price point for the state currently is hovering around that $500,000 mark, which is actually really great. At the peak of 2020, 2021, we were looking at a median price of closer to $600,000 and no inventory. So in terms of what our supply looks like, what do we expect to see, especially if the projected 4 interest rate drops happen?
It's kind of going back to studying the market, what it's done in the history and what it's kind of doing now. We can kind of start to project. So obviously nobody knows 100% what's going to happen. But, if we go back to the history, when we were in our crashes, we actually seen around 25,000 homes on the market total. Wow. And that was a lot, right?
That was a lot.
And we look at it now, on the lowest portion, in 2020, 2021, when we had the lowest inventory we've ever seen in the state, we hit as low as 1,200 properties, which is insane.
It was crazy.
That kind of lets us know what kind of market we're in, right? So anything under about 3 months of supply, which in Utah is about 5,000 homes or so, is going to be what would be considered more of a seller's market, right? And then anything between that 8,500 to 10,000, kind of more of a neutral market. And then we start swinging heavy into a buyer's market. I would really say anything above 18,000. And so right now people are like, well, we're at the 11 to 12,000 mark. So are we swinging into this buyer's market? And not necessarily, right? It's still more in that neutral market right now, where we're seeing people be able to negotiate kind of on both sides, depending on the location and the condition of the house. If you have something that's in really good condition right now, it's really selling still pretty quickly in, 1 to 2 weeks. But the average house, we're not all living, we don't all have this great immaculate condition all the time, and sometimes we don't want to put in money to fix that property up. It's really kind of taking more of that 90-day, 60-day mark right now, which is actually normal. We just got spoiled, during those good years of having those, 1 to 2 weeks. So anyway, as stuff starts to drop down, right, we can start that 11,000. My point of that, the 11,000 is really kind of a man-made thing, because as they pumped up, the interest rates to 8% last year, it kind of froze the market down. And then we had the great holdout, because everyone has these amazing interest rates. So the people that want to move are just staying put. The people that need to move obviously have to move. People are thinking we have all this inventory. We do, but it's really artificial, because the second those interest rates drop as they are now, that really could be consumed in, roughly a few months, and we could be way back into those low 5,000 to 2,000 houses on the market at a time, which could put a lot of stress on buyers. And so sellers go, well, cool, I'm going to be able to make the most money for my property. Sure, you would be. However, if you're a buyer, which most sellers are going to have to go somewhere else, then you're going to also feel the squeeze on what you can purchase. So right now, I feel like we're kind of in that sweet spot. You can still get concessions and, decently top dollar if you're a seller. And so a negotiable market is a healthy market. We don't want extremes in either direction. And that's where we are, right here in the middle. So
And you make a good point. I think just from an agent perspective, as somebody who studies the market all the time, and even for when we like to purchase our investment properties, a neutral market is the best because when you have sellers capping out high, like you say, they become buyers, or it becomes more unreasonable for the buy side. And then, when buyers can demand everything from a market, that becomes unreasonable. In negotiations or any sort of dealings, you kind of want it to be both parties. And that is exactly where we're at right now.
exactly. So both parties, should be feeling like they're winning, and that can happen. And so, another thing I wanted to touch on is just the new construction stuff. So everyone, especially locally, they're like, Utah is always under construction. There's always apartment buildings going up. So it seems like we're overbuilding. What people don't realize, though, is like Kim was saying a little bit earlier, we're 35 to 45,000 homes short, and that's just in Utah. In the whole United States, we're actually 1.8 million homes short, because in 2008, when we had the crash, right, all the builders stopped building because we had the opposite of what happened then. We had 13 months of inventory in most states and most cities, and so when the crash happened, they got kind of stuck with this overabundance of products, right? So what happened is they stopped building, cities stopped giving permits out, they started really limiting them, and really until like 2023, most cities, especially here in Utah, have been very conservative on how many permits they're going to issue, since obviously we're the second driest state in the whole country. We have to think about water and infrastructure and things like that. So cities want to make sure that before they go gangbusters on allowing permitting, that we have the infrastructure and the water to actually be able to support that. So they're releasing it slowly. So honestly, the governor came out a few months ago and talked about some solutions that he's trying to push in, some incentives. But honestly, it would take us around 10 years to be able to, actually have enough inventory just to equal out and not have an overabundance in inventory. So that's the thing, is people want to hold out for a long time, but that's not really usually in your best interest, because the market's going to keep doing what it does, and it's going to keep going up eventually as we start running out of space and we get caught up on everything.
And I think there was actually an article that came out that said by 2030, which is only 6 years away, our median price point will be $1 million. And so the thing about it is, even though we seem like we have a great amount of inventory now that nobody's buying, that it's not a great time to buy, it's always better to go against the grain, because one thing we do know in Utah is regardless of what the market might look like, we always see those appreciation gains, typically 4 to 6% year over year.
Totally, yeah. And I have some friends that live in different states around us that are seeing like 2 or 3%. So Utah really does outperform appreciation gains compared to our other states around us. But yeah, I think this is something to consider. Is everyone's saying how expensive it is now, but imagine if you got into a median priced home now for 500 to 600,000, and then in 6 years you're almost doubling that. Real estate, we're talking about 6 to 7% usually. Imagine doubling your money in 6 years, and that could be what could potentially be happening here in Utah.
So one pro for some buyers to wait is definitely because it's an election year, and there's always a lot of uncertainty around the country when different policymakers and things like that get voted into office. So for buyers, a pro might be that at least next year, they'll know who's in office and what that really looks like for the housing market or for them personally. What's your advice to buyers, Sloan, who say they want to wait until the election's up because they feel like it will affect the economy?
Yeah, I think that's a big fear. We talk to people every day about this, and it never fails, at least once a day, this comes up on, I'm kind of nervous about, doesn't really matter who your party is, right? On both sides, people are like, I'm a little bit nervous about X getting into presidency and what that's going to do for the housing, the economy in general. And, I'm not saying that it's not a valid question, but I think we're a little over exaggerating the power that a president really has and how long it takes for policies to actually take effect and to start really changing the outcome of the economy, right? So this would be the question I would ask you, or I'd have you ask yourself is, am I planning to stay in the area for 2 to 3 years or more than 2 years? Because if you are, I don't really feel like it really matters who gets elected. Utah has never really seen a less depreciation than 4%. We're usually 6 to 8, like Kim was saying earlier. We're on a $400,000 house, just to give you perspective, that's $24,000 a year of equity you're building every year. So imagine I'm waiting till next year, losing the $24,000, or even worse, what if the person that you want does not get elected? And that's a 4-year term. So you're gonna wait 4 years to take action. on something that may or may not even happen with policy changes, right? Or even worse, what if they do a double term and it's not the person you like, and now you're 8 years? And we just talked about, where they're projecting. This isn't our projection. These are the key economics professors in the United States that are projecting Utah to have an increase of 1 million to 1.1 million in the median house range. So imagine waiting those 4 years just because of fear, and then before you know it, you just lost not just $24,000, but $500,000. So, obviously at the end of the day, it's going to be a personal decision for you, and we're not here to push you. One of my biggest jobs as a realtor or a local market expert is to really just challenge, your thinking a little bit, just to make sure that you're making a decision based off of sound advice. And either way you go is not really a concern. Like, we just want to make sure that or at least processing and thinking about things and getting that fear piece out of your mind, so you can really just make a decision based on facts and historical data. And so if you ever just want to talk about that a little more in detail on what that looks like, what our thoughts are on the election, or you just want to soundboard that, feel free to reach out, send us a text, email, or give us a call. We can set up a Zoom call. Obviously not here to talk political on who we like or don't like, but just mainly on what that could look like for the housing market.
So from sellers, we know some who are choosing to wait until next year with the hope that purchase prices actually will increase and they'll make more the sell of their house. That is a concern. If it's a good market for buyers, this isn't a good market for sellers. Now, of course, the pro to waiting to sell is next year. We do project to see those purchase prices jump as interest rates continue to drop. And, that will likely make a more competitive market with the bid wars and all of those things happening again. You can also likely keep more of your equity in a competitive market, not having to pay as much in concessions or closing costs, rate buy downs, or do any sort of repairs to sell, kind of like we saw in 2020. An added pro is that if you were to go and purchase at that point, you would again have those lower interest rates that would help your payment out on that side. But there are still some cons to waiting to sell until next year.
Yes, in terms of selling, a lot of it is really going to be the goal of the seller and what they're trying to accomplish, right? If you're going to be purchasing as well and you're not just moving or renting or living with family or something, then, which is about 85%, I feel like, of sellers. Usually you're selling something, you have to buy something, you're going somewhere, right? And so the con to that, obviously, if you're buying, is you're going to have a lot more competition than you would have right now, right? So it's really hard to, time to sell high and buy low. That's very rare. It's almost a unicorn. You'd have a better shot, at winning the lottery, but there's still going to be opportunities that you can take, regardless of what the market is doing. Of course, when those interest rates do drop, and like Kim said, they are projecting about 4 more drops between now and the end of 2025, a lot of those buyers are going to come out of the woodwork. And yes, you might make more money on that sell side, but you're going to be turning around and putting that right back in to the house that you're purchasing, as you're likely going to have to pay your own closing costs, maybe more for the property than you would have paid because it's just scaled up a little bit. And then maybe you won't be able to negotiate some of those repair items that you might have been able to negotiate this year. So really at the end of the day, it might be 6s, with really even you being able to actually also increase your property value as those rates drop, and now you start seeing that boom around you. You could actually start just gaining that equity instead of buying the equity later on next year. Of course, selling right now isn't all just rainbows and sunshine, because right now it is taking a little bit longer to sell houses, right? Instead of that 2 to 3 week period like we were talking about, it's taking more average of 60 to 75 days, and you might not be getting as much money on the purchase price as you would next year if you were to wait to sell. You might have to do some repairs and some things like that, right? But again, you're still going to be, in my opinion, in a better position to do those things now, buy low, and then, just see like that equity build as the market starts rebounding. And really buying at the high price point, that's kind of the most dangerous in my opinion anyway, because if you buy at the high price point and then stuff does start to falter a little bit, that's where you're going to start losing money. And if you sell, soon anyway, like most people aren't selling in the next year or two, so it wouldn't really matter. I think it kind of goes up and down, it's cyclical, and you'd be okay. But that's just something to consider. Well, I would rather not overpay for the house I'm buying to start with. I'd rather buy, a little bit lower, which is now, and then, as stuff starts going up, I'm getting that instant equity naturally from the market rebounding.
And something I like to remind our clients about is, typically speaking, when you are purchasing your next house, you're selling one house and purchasing the next house, that next house is typically in a higher price point. So people always want to just consider the sell side. Well, I want to sell for the highest. And what you're not considering is, if you're buying in a higher price point, it actually makes more sense buy at a lower price point and sell at a lower price point, because the savings are bigger since you're moving up in price points. And I think typically people don't think about that. They just see their money that they're losing, when in terms of, kind of like Sloan said, you're able to buy more house now than you have been for the last couple of years. I mean, we helped a client recently buy $1 million house in the low 900s. And a couple of years ago, that would have been well over $1 million. And a couple years from now, that will be well over $1 million again. And so in terms of getting into the house that you want to get into, selling now makes more sense than losing some of that money on the sales side, and then being able to really capitalize on your purchase on a house that you may not be able to afford, especially when it comes to a competitive market.
Yeah, totally, 100% agree.
So speaking to the 2020 market, I want to dive a little bit more into that, because I do think once interest rates lower, I don't think we'll be at that extreme. I don't think anything will ever be at that extreme again.
We hope not.
Yeah, I really hope not. That we call those the unicorn years for a reason, and you only see a unicorn once in your life. Let's hope, right?
Yeah.
But I do think we will see some of the same things happening in the market. First off, there was no buying at purchase price, right? Like everything was bid wars and buying above purchase price. And we personally were seeing buyers offer up to $100,000 overpriced and still losing.
Imagine the defeat you're going to feel as a buyer if you put $100,000 above list price and still lose multiple times. Like,
and
bananas.
that was happening all the time, you guys. And again, that's even if you were able to do that, right? Which a lot of people weren't.
Especially first-time home buyers, right?
Exactly. And that's exactly it. So now I don't think we'll get that crazy again, hopefully. I don't know, of course, but I think that some of the things we will see are, those multiple offer situations where you are having to go 10 or 20,000 above purchase price. And purchase price, remember, is something that you can't change. So I definitely think that's something to consider as we talk about a competitive market versus a non-competitive market like we're in now. Now, if you can get a purchase price at a less amount, even for a higher interest rate, you can change an interest rate. We can never change a purchase price.
Yeah, for sure. Other things that we should consider in a competitive market are things like, how handy are you, right? I'm not a handy guy, so I don't want to come in there and do a bunch of work,
have to do
right?
a bunch of repairs.
Or have you guys tried to find a contractor recently?
Yeah.
It's like they're all doing these bigger jobs for new construction and all that kind of stuff because it's easier. They're booked out. Even my handymans are booked out sometimes a few weeks in advance.
Well, and it was worse in 2020, right?
Totally.
So it's like now, as busy as they are now in 2020, it was like you couldn't get a hold of anybody. You were just in trouble.
Absolutely. And one thing to remember is some of these repairs, guys, have to be, done before closing, right? Because depending on the loan you're getting, whether it's FHA or VA, those are a lot more, they have more restrictions in there, like flaking paint and having handrails and certain things that might have to be completed prior to closing on the transaction. And if you can't afford to really wait 3 weeks to be able to, get that to be completed. So another thing to consider, guys, is how much money can you put towards your down payment? How much do you have towards closing costs, right? Because right now we're able to negotiate, sometimes 2 to 2.5% in closing costs to be paid for on your behalf, which allows you to maybe, even if you had those already, you could buy down your rates or do things, that might benefit your monthly payment a little bit more. Because obviously getting those concessions paid by the seller is going to become more difficult as we get into a more competitive market. Certain loan types, like I talked about earlier, FHA and VA, those are going to become harder to get accepted. I know back in 2020, 2021, we had quite a few clients that pre-approved for VA and FHA. We couldn't get their offer accepted, not because it wasn't strong, but just because it was FHA or VA. So if you guys don't know about, those kind of loan types, what happens is they're a federal type of loan. They're a government-backed loan. So they have to go through more, type of restrictions, like I was talking about, like lead-based paint and flaking paint and carpet and like all these things that are, might be seen as minor type things on, a conventional sale. They are actually bigger things when it becomes, FHA or VA regulated loans.
Well, and don't even talk about 100% financing. I think almost all of our clients right now are able to do 100% financing, which is like your grant programs or your second mortgage program, so that if you truly want to bring in $0 out of pocket, you have that option. Well, those programs go away when competitive markets happen, not because we don't have the money for them. It's simply because they require more checks and balances, and they make the process slightly more difficult for the seller. So the seller at that point, if you have conventional offers, you're taking the conventional offer.
Totally. And one thing I just want you guys to know, if you guys do choose to work with us when you're relocating here to Utah, we have tons of experience working with FHA and VA type loan types. So even in that hard market, even though it was harder, we were still getting a lot of our buyers approved. This takes a little more finesse, and sometimes you do lose out. So it's just something you have to have a little bit of thicker skin and not be as attached, because it might take us a little longer, but we will for sure get it done for you regardless of what's going on in the market.
Yeah, so when considering the pros and cons, one thing I can say, just from being in all the different markets we've seen, if you can afford to purchase, I think now is a great time for buyers in general. You know, you've got 100% financing programs, which are great right now. You've got a ton of negotiation power on purchase price, seller paid concessions like closing costs, repairs, all of those things. And while it's obviously case specific, I'm always of the mindset that buying sooner rather than later pays off.
Yeah, definitely. But if you can't buy right now because you just don't have enough money, or you don't have any equity to roll over, or you just have to have that lower interest rate to even qualify, the next year is still going to be a great market. And in 2020, when the market was very competitive, we still helped tons of families get into their homes, even first-time home buyers. No matter what you do, the key is just having a great lender and, of course, a great realtor just helping you along, with your process. Well, that does it for us. Those are some of the pros and cons about purchasing now versus waiting until next year. Obviously, a buyer's purchasing timeline is going to be different, and only you can decide, what's right for you and when it's going to be the right time for you. And in every market, there's always going to be pros and cons. Our goal is really always just to make sure that you just have the information to make that best decision for you and, of course, your family.
We hope you enjoyed this video and found it helpful. Picking where you'll call home is an important decision, and we would love to help you make that smooth transition to Northern Utah. If you're looking to purchase in the Northern Utah area, give us a call, shoot us a text, or send us an email. And until next time, we are keeping it real estate.